ready to go? Are we recording? Okay. My name is Phil Westra. I'm a Master Gardener intern this year. I did the Master Gardening training last fall, and I'm here to talk about composting because that is an important topic that's in all of our trainings, and compost essentially is what we do when we feed the soil, and composting is essentially mimicking what happens when things break down. Every year in the forest, leaves fall off the trees, hit the ground. Worms, microbes, the fungi break down the matter and feed the soil, which feeds the new plant life. And composting essentially is mimicking that process, trying to utilize it, make it as efficient and as effective as possible. And I'm here at the Sanborn Community Garden here, and this is a place where we have various people from the community that garden here, as well as a donation garden. You can swing around and see where we are this time of year. This is a time of year when we are doing a lot of pulling out the material, and composting is how we process it so it breaks down, and by next spring we can use this compost back on the garden to fertilize the garden. So this year we started composting with essentially compost bins. We put these stakes in the ground, put pallets over here, and so we have essentially 4 sections. This is where we ask people to just dump their scraps. So they put their scraps in here, and what I do is I bring a kind of a chipper, mulcher thing, and I grind them all down, and then we fill up a bin. And then when this is full, then we move all the contents to the next bin, and then we move it here. So we're turning the compost, and that's what helps it break down. So compost requires 5 things. If you read your material, I think, or did your homework, we need a source of carbon matter, we need a source of nitrogen, we need oxygen, we need water, and we need the biological microorganisms that actually break down the compost. There's some complicated formulas, but essentially stuff like this is mostly brown, mostly carbon. There's some nitrogen in it. What most people say is you want 1 part browns, or 2 parts browns to 1 part green. And you want the mixture, so green materials is anything that's higher in nitrogen. We call it greens because a lot of times it's green, but coffee grounds count as a green. And I have a bin over here that I brought some material that I compost with. And so browns, I grind up the sticks that fall off my trees, wood chips. Newspaper and cardboard are browns. That's a lot of carbon. This time of the year I've got a leaf vacuum mulcher that I'm sucking up my leaves, and I'm breaking them down a little bit. Sawdust, I got a buddy that's a carpenter. He says he'd love me to take all the sawdust I can take. Those are kind of the browns. You can add straw to that. And if you need 2 parts browns to 1 part greens, you need a source of this stuff. I think probably the #1 mistake people make in composting is they just throw all their food scraps in a bin. And we're like, why does it stink so bad? You know, because, well, you need twice as many of these as you want your food scraps. So think about, what you can do to get some brown material, and I'll talk about a little bit when we go to our next site. And then the greens, here's some lettuce that I took out of my garden. Even though coffee grounds are brown, it's a green because they're high in nitrogen. Food scraps, I get some food scraps from a school next door. I just bring them a green Menards bucket that has compost painted on it. They threw their food scraps in there, and I throw those in my compost bins. And since I'm helping with this composting here, and I have a compost in my other garden, I'm always thinking, I need more greens over there, I need more browns over there. So every now and then I bring some material back and forth. Yes, Jan.
Can a green be a weed?
Absolutely, a green can be a weed, yes. Yep.
Okay, let's answer why.
Why can a weed be a green? Well, what we do when we our composting is we're trying to accelerate that weed decomposing, and one thing, that weed could have a seed in it. If you get your compost hot enough, that weed seed will die in the composting process. If you don't get it hot enough, it'll germinate and sprout, and then when you're turning your compost, it'll just kind of get chopped up anyway. So by the end of the composting process, what you really have is you have a new topsoil fertilizer that is weed free. And that's what I enjoy about it, is I like to just put a layer of compost on top of my garden every fall and every spring. And then I'm starting with a surface that doesn't have any weeds in it. And I'm feeding the soil because the biology will bring that compost down. You're feeding the soil so the soil can feed the plants. And compost is the number 1 thing I use for fertilizer. I really don't need much other fertilizer. If I'm adding a lot of organic matter, plants seem to really thrive. So yeah, you can put chopped up weeds or not so chopped up. I like to chop them up because it's easy to handle the compost if you kind of break things up. This is just an aerator, and well, before I do that, I think I have a thermometer. Yeah. I just built this on Tuesday. The compost was up to here. So you can see just in a couple days it's already settled. And what I did is I've mixed new corn stalks we shredded up, new greens with some previous compost. Essentially everything in these bins is what we've composted this whole season so far. So it starts as a lot of mass, but as it breaks down, it gets much smaller. And what we could do is stick a thermometer in here and see, let it heat up a little bit, but I'm guessing it's going to be in the active to hot range, like 130, 140 degrees in the middle of this right now. And that means the biology is really working hard. If you, what are we at? Can you tell?
130.
130? 120, 130 range. And if you feel the end, it's warm. And what this does is this is just a way to aerate it. So you just turn into it a little ways and then pull it up. And you can see it steam a little bit. So that shows how active this is, and it's decomposing pretty good rate. And again, you want compost, you want it to have plenty of oxygen, and what we're doing is we're helping just the air get through a little bit. It smells a little bit right now, and it shouldn't smell quite that anaerobic. So by stirring it a little bit, you're giving it oxygen, you're letting the bacteria you want to thrive in there do well. And so that's one way you can just kind of stir a pile like this. Now if I didn't break everything down, it'd be about impossible to do this. If I just threw all the greens in here without breaking it down, first of all, it's almost gonna have too much air, it won't hold water. And the more you break things down, the more surface area it has, the more the microbes can break it down. But you don't want to just make it a powder, because then it doesn't have any air. So it's kind of, I like to say, you shred things down as much as you can, and then it'll be a good amount of, kind of a balance of surface area, but also letting it get some oxygen.
Messed it up. Start again.
Good.
Yeah.
We talked about composting on a bigger scale. At the Sanborn Community Garden, we actually have bins that pretty much can take all of the garden scraps from that garden and compost those down. If your backyard, like in my backyard, you want something a little smaller, I started with like a single bin, and I just stirred it, putting some straw and food scraps in. And then I bought this Mantis compost tumbler, and I've used this for probably 7 seasons. And I think I can get 3 or 4 rounds of compost with this. Essentially, it works as a tumbler. It's on gears, and you just spin it. So every couple days, I make my kids come and spin the compost a little bit. And then this particular one has two sides, 2 bins. And if I stir it up a little bit, you can see this is steaming too, pretty good.
It's beautiful.
And so when I started doing this, I lived in Vermont before I moved to Northwest Iowa. I had chickens, and I would take the chicken bedding and the chicken manure and dump it in here, making sure I had a lot more bedding than manure, and then put our garden scraps, our food scraps, and fill this and turn it, and then fill that side. And by that time that I was done filling that up, this would be ready. And I just kind of went back and forth, and that's how I really started building my garden with this composter. And yeah, this has been composting for about a month in here, and it's pretty rich stuff. This I just finished, or I just kind of started it. It's got a lot more browns in it right now than greens. Still see a lot of wood chips in there, but it's heating up pretty fast because I just tore out a whole slew of plants from my garden and ground them up and threw them in there. We asked about tools, and if I were to recommend anyone just buy one thing, it would be something like this that sucks leaves up, mulches them into a bag. And then for a couple bucks, you can buy some of these yard bags. And so I store mulched up leaves in this. And if you have a backyard composter, whether it's a little bin or it's a small tumbler, you can throw food scraps in and put a few handfuls of leaves in with it, right? And that way you're keeping that browns and greens ratio. I know people who live off the grid who have compost toilets that go to the bathroom and they have a bucket of browns right next to them, and they throw that in there, and they use that for their fertilizer and recycle their own waste. Yeah, composting is really the recycling thing, right? So I grind up, like I said, newspaper and things like that. Put that in here. For the wood chipper, actually, this is my wood chipper. So this is a little higher dollar item, but you can chip up to 3-inch sticks here. Or if you have some like branches that have leaves on them, you can just throw those in kind of this shredder in the top. And I kind of put everything in through this. The big broccoli stalks, I'll actually just chip those right up into kind of almost a mulch, dump them in there, and they compost really fast and really good. So I did that with some food scraps. I actually had some tiny little squash that were this big, and so I just cut them in quarters and ground them up, and this is kind of our food scrap bucket that we have in our kitchen, and every day we just come out and we dump this into the compost bin. And since I have a lot of browns in there, I don't need to necessarily throw some in, but it can't hurt. And then after that's done, go on to my second one. That I haven't owned this very long, but I essentially have a half a bag of browns already in there, and it's dry, so it's not going to compost yet. But when that's full, we'll do this one next and this one, and by that time we'll just keep cycling through. This is kind of just the backyard thing, and we get so much compost I can keep expanding my garden with this. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the bulk of maybe translating that into the backyard. And the nice thing about tumblers, again, is you just turn them and they spin themselves. There's little, fins, in there that help tumble it. Mm-hmm. What I have in my personal garden is almost the same as what you saw in the community garden, only I have super bags. I'm just having them in those big bulk bags. What I like about that is it's all self-contained. The water doesn't evaporate and leave because they're sealed on the top, which makes me think a person almost could just take a old trash barrel and drill some holes in the bottom and use that as a composter. Right? You don't have to buy a fancy tumbler. You can compost in anything that's a container with a lid, as long as you again have the right ratio, have some compost to start with, something to activate it.
It's a little harder to spin too. I've tried
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I think one of those,
Little
your drill
aerators?
downs, the
Yeah,
aerator
little
would
auger
work.
type thing? Okay.
Now
Yep.
my Christmas list is growing.